This behind one of the Manchester wood.
Beautiful Mount Equinox on that side, and into.
That is, I was Chief Justice.
By gunsmith John Dowd in Goshen, Connecticut. So he died in March, and he's really good. And they're lovely. Hello, I'm Sean Harrington from the Manchester Historical Society, and welcome to another episode of Timestamp. We're here today in Factory Point Cemetery, which was established in 1791. And as you can see by all the leaves off the trees, we just had Halloween go by. It's early November, and we've had ghosts and goblins and vampires that roam the streets of Manchester picking up candy. But here in Manchester, we actually had our own vampire story, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. In early New England, diseases like tuberculosis, which they called consumption back then, these were unknowns. People didn't know what was happening, why people were dying, especially from the same households. Kind of sounds a little familiar, but anyway, somebody would get sick from tuberculosis, and then somebody else would get sick, and then somebody else would get sick, and they couldn't figure out, there was no medicines, so a lot of times it came down to lore. And they started blaming demons. And then later on, it was when vampires came in, they kind of attached the vampire thing to it because they figured the life was being sucked from the living by the dead. So there was a few documented cases. I mean, we're talking from the 1790s all the way up until 1892 down in Rhode Island, the Mercy Brown vampire incident. But what we had here in Manchester was we had Mrs. Rachel Burton. And how do we know about this? Well, we know about this because Judge John S. Pettibone, wrote a manuscript in 1860. And in that manuscript was the story of the demon vampire. Now, had he not included this little story, it would have been lost to the ages, and we would have just said, wow, what a very pretty headstone. So I'm going to read you a little bit of that manuscript right now. And he wrote, "She was, to use the words of one who is well acquainted with her, a fine, healthy, beautiful girl. Not long after they were married, she went into a decline, and after a year or so, she died of consumption, tuberculosis. Captain Burton, after a year or more, married Huldah Powell, daughter of Esquire Powell, by his first wife. Huldah was a very healthy, good-looking girl, not as handsome as his first wife. She became ill soon after they were married, and when she was in the last stages of a consumption, a strange infatuation took possession of the minds of the connections and friends of the family. They were induced to believe that if the vitals of the first wife could be consumed by being burned in a charcoal fire, it would effect a cure of the sick second wife. Such was the strange delusion that they had been disinterred the first wife, who had been buried about 3 years. They took out the liver, heart, and lungs, what remained of them, and burned them to ashes in the blacksmith's forge of Jacob Mead. Timothy Mead officiated over the altar and the sacrifice of the demon vampire, who it was believed was still sucking the blood of the then living wife of Captain Burton. It was the month of February, and good slaying. Such was the excitement that from 500 to 1,000 people were present. This account was furnished me by an eyewitness of the transaction, and that was written in 1860. Oh, and one more thing I want to tell you about the stone. This stone is very unique. This stone is actually signed by the carver. Think of all the thousands and thousands of headstones you may or may not have seen in your life. How many of them you see were signed by the sculptor? Well, this one is. It's signed Z. Collins, and that stands for Zerubbabel Collins, sculptor, Shaftesbury, from a very famous family of gravestone sculptors who were in this area, New England, Vermont, Connecticut, Rhode Island. So when you see this stone, if you happen to make the walk over here, just know that even the stone is special. And you may be asking, well, did it work? In order to find that out, we're going to have to make a little trip, and we're going to go to Dellwood Cemetery. Follow me. So, we're now at the grave of the Deacon Isaac Burton, right here. And he was a poor, suffering husband of Rachel. Now, did it work, we asked. The answer is no. Hulda died in 1793. Alas, all that work, and she still died of consumption. But fret not for Isaac, because Isaac married another 2 times. You can see here on a stone, he married again. This was the woman who outlived him, 1854. But before he married Miss Dempsey, he married Clara. And Clara, alas, she didn't like it either. So what did we learn here today? We learned about the demon vampires. Were they real? You know, it just goes to show that back then when they couldn't explain things, they just blamed it on the supernatural. And you know, today there's a little bit of that left around here and there, but you know, these stones, they all tell a story. And when you drive past these stone gardens that blanket our countryside, just remember, every stone has a story. See you next time!